Okay, so welcome everybody. So we have 5 people in the class right now. We'll get started. Let them join in as they come. All right. So maybe we'll try to do it a little bit different this time. Uh, Hopefully, all of you have already watched the video, and then it's just a question of we'll go through the slides. As any one of you, as you watch the slides, if you have questions, you can stop me, and then we'll take it from there. All right. Okay. So we are going to be talking about gradually varied flow. So far, we've been discussing uniform flow, right? So today we'll be talking about gradually varied flow. So yeah, so in most practical situations, what has been observed is that uniform flow conditions do not necessarily always happen, right? You may have some changes either in the channel or in the slope or whatever it may be that may result in a situation where uniform flow may not be possible, right? So whatever is observed is steady non-uniform flow, right, with gradual changes in the water surface elevation. So if I have this kind of a flow, then that is what we refer to as gradually varied flow, right? So now every word here is important here. Okay, so the very first word, steady, right, which means that there's nothing that is changing as a function of time. All right, so the first word, steady, implies that we are still not looking at any flows where the flow rate is changing as a function of time, right? So we are still looking at steady flows. And then non-uniform. So non-uniform refers to the fact that although things are constant in time, which is the first word, steady, they are non-uniform, which means they are not constant or not uniform in space, right? So I have steady non-uniform flow. That describes a condition where it is not uniform, right? Then the important thing is that whatever changes are happening in the water surface elevation, right, are gradual changes, right? So when I say gradual changes, typically what that means is that the slope of that water surface is not too high, right? So if the water surface is changing, then naturally there will be a slope to that change, right? If that slope becomes too high, then we don't call it gradually varied flow, right? We refer to that typically as rapidly varied flow. So gradually varied flow is one in which, number one, the flow is steady. Number two, it's non-uniform, obviously, right? And then this non-uniformity is not such that the water surface elevation is changing at a rapid rate. It is changing very gradually, right? So unless you describe it in these terms, then unless you're precise with the definitions, then it's not possible to call it gradually varied flow. All right, so that is an understanding of gradually varied flow. Now, why is it caused? Why do we have gradually varying water surface elevations? Typically it is caused by changes in the bottom slope. That is the most common one, where if I have a bottom slope that is changing, then you get a situation where you have gradually varied flow. It's also possible to have that if the cross section is changing, right? So if I have a rectangular or a trapezoidal cross section where for some reason you have to make the cross section wider or narrower or whatever it may be, that can also cause these gradual changes uh, in the flow, which we have already discussed in the context of uniform flow. If you remember from the last class, we spoke about uh, you know if the width of the cross section changes, how there's a transition from a certain uniform flow to another uniform flow. So that transition, you can think of it as a gradually varied flow, right? So that's the context in which we need to understand gradually varied flow. Now, in terms of physical examples of gradually varied flow, typically what you will see is that if I have a dam or another structure which is called a weir, these two structures are typically water storing devices. A dam is a much larger version of a weir, basically. A weir is a smaller scale dam, if you can think of it that way. What is the dam? What is the function of the dam? The function of the dam is essentially to store water. So when it stores water, what it does is the river in the natural course, it will just flow at whatever level it is. But when I construct a dam across the river, what I do is that I end up storing water, which means the water surface behind the dam starts to build up, right? So it rises to a certain height. So if you read about different dams in the country and around the world, you will hear about this, that the height of the dam is so and so, it's 100 meters tall, or it is 35 meters tall, or whatever it is, right? So then you'll also hear about, oh, they are planning to raise the height of the dam, right? What happens when you raise the height of the dam? You store more water, right? So that's the objective. The objective is to store water so that you can use it for other purposes. You can use it for irrigation, you can use it for power production, you can use it for industries, you can use it for to supply water to cities and so on, right? So that's the objective of the dam. But in doing that, you raise the water level behind the dam, right? So if I go far away from the dam in the upstream direction, at some point the river will not feel the effect of the dam. But as I approach the dam, it starts feeling the influence of the dam, because the dam is raising the water level, right? So as I approach the dam, the water surface in the river slowly starts increasing until it reaches the level that is reached by the dam, right? So at the dam, you may have water surface at a certain level, and if you go back the river in the upstream direction, upstream in the river, at some point you will notice that the influence of the dam is not felt. But as you get closer and closer to the dam, the water level in the river also starts changing as it approaches the dam, right? So that phenomenon is what is called the backwater, right? Backwater of a dam, right? So if you go to some of these tourist places, they're called, it is the Kaveri backwaters, or they'll call it the the Godavari backwaters, or so on, right? So the different parts. If in Andhra Pradesh, I think you have one of those dams, you have some artificial pond or something created where people go for fishing and boating and all that. So those are what are called the backwaters, right? So that's the backwater caused by a dam. That is a typical example of a gradually varied flow profile. Okay. Another example is when I have a sudden drop in a channel, right? So suppose the flow is coming in the channel and then there is a sudden drop in the channel, then again, you will notice that the water surface tends to draw down until it reaches the point at which there's a drop in the channel. You can think of it somewhat like a waterfall or something like that, right? So if you go far away from that waterfall, the river does not feel the influence of that sudden drop in the channel, right? But as it approaches, the water surface in the river slowly, gradually starts to drop until it reaches the sudden drop, where the water, of course, falls over the cliff or whatever. All right. So these are some very typical examples of gradually varied flow. So now, the interesting thing in the case of gradually varied flow profiles is that the bed slope, the water surface slope, and the energy slope are all different, right? So if you remember from our discussion on uniform flows, you would have you'll remember that the water surface is parallel to the bed, right? So that's the very definition of uniform flows, right? I have the bed of the channel, and then the water surface will be parallel to the bed. And if I draw another line, which is the energy line, so let me quickly try to draw that, right? So let us say I have the bed of the channel. Okay, maybe we can make that in black. Okay, so let's say this is the bed of the channel, right? So this is the bed of the channel, and the blue line, the black line, is the bed of the channel. The blue line, if you think of it as a uniform flow, the blue line is the water surface, right? And then let's have one more color. Let us say that this is the energy line. What is the energy line? Energy line is simply the datum elevation plus y plus v square by 2g, right? So v square by 2g, if I think of this component as v square by 2g at any cross section, right? So that could be your v square by 2g, right? So this v square by 2g will remain constant in a uniform flow, right? Because y is not changing, q is not changing, so why will velocity change? If velocity doesn't change, then v square by 2g also remains constant along the channel in a uniform flow. So in the uniform flow, the bed slope, which is the black line, the water surface slope, which is the blue line, and the energy slope, which is the when I say energy slope, sorry, I should have said the water surface, the bed, and the energy line they're all parallel to each other, right? So the slopes of the bed and the water surface and the energy line are all different, are all the same in the case of uniform flow. But by the very definition of gradually varied flow, this will not be the case, right? The bed surface will not be parallel to the water surface, or if you have to say it the other way around, the water surface will not be parallel to the bed surface, and the energy line will also not be parallel to the water surface line or to the bed surface, bed slope. Okay, so that is the distinction between uniform flow and gradually varied flow, right? All right. So again, just to reiterate, the gradually varied flow profile is caused by changes in the bottom slope or changes in the cross section. All right. Now, if I want to analyze and understand what kind of gradually varied flow profile will be caused by a certain change in this slope or a certain change in the cross section and so on, I can do an approximate analysis if I assume that the changes are small and not sudden. What I mean by that is, let us say the surface, the bed slope of the channel is suddenly changing for some reason. Okay, so just imagine this. Let us say for some reason I have a channel where the bed is going at some angle, and then for some reason there's a change in the bed slope. Okay, for whatever reason, this first line is at a certain slope, the second line is at a slightly different slope. It's not the exact same slope. Okay, so if I have this kind of a gradual change in the slope, then I can do an approximate analysis to understand what kind of gradually varied flow profile will it be? How long will that gradually varied flow profile be? So that kind of an approximate analysis is possible if I assume that the change is small and not sudden. Okay, so that is possible in the case of gradually varied flow profile. But again, there's a few assumptions that have to be satisfied. Okay, so the most important assumption that we make in the case of gradually varied flow profile is that the pressure distribution at any point in the flow will be hydrostatic. Okay, that's the most important assumption. Then the next assumption is that the velocity at any cross section can be approximated by the uniform flow equation, right? And then the only difference is that instead of using the uniform flow equation without changing it at all, what we do is that instead of using the bed slope in the velocity equation, if you remember the Manning's equation, it is V equal to 1 by N R to the power 2 by 3 S naught per half. That is Manning's equation, right? So instead of using S naught, which is the bed slope, we use SF in that equation, right? So this is the exact same as the equation that we had developed for uniform flow, except that I'm using the energy slope instead of the bed slope. Okay, now is there why is it that we are using this equation to uh, do this, right? Why are we able to use this equation in the case of gradually varied flow? Does anybody have an answer? Why are we using this equation in a gradually varied flow? We are saying it's a gradually varied flow, but we are using the uniform flow equation with some modification. What is the justification for using this equation to estimate the velocity at any cross section? Anybody has an answer? Okay, so let's see who wants to answer this. Harsha, if you can please unmute your microphone. Maybe I can unmute it. Okay, Harsha. So what is the justification for using this equation in the gradually varied flow profile? Do you have any idea? Yes, go ahead. Okay, I don't know if you're speaking, but we can't hear you. All right, so we'll call on somebody else. Pavan. Go ahead. Yes. So you have to say something. You can say, I don't know the answer. That's okay. But speak up. What is going on? Why does nobody want to speak? Okay. So, yes, anybody wants to say something?
Sir, maybe we are considering one section, and in
Okay.
that section it is uniform.
Yes. Okay. So, yeah. So the justification, thank you, Ajay. So that the justification is that, as we said, the, the fundamental assumption behind the whole concept of gradually varied flow is that the flow is gradually varying. So the slope is so small that if you consider any given section, you can assume that within a short distance, it is almost like uniform flow, because the slope is so gentle, the slope is so small, you can almost approximate it as a uniform flow, right? So that is the justification which allows us to use this equation. But of course, we still understand that if I use S naught at every point, then I'll get the same velocity at every point. So I have to use SF, which is the energy slope, which, as if you remember from the previous slide, oh no, on the same slide, sorry, the energy slope is not the same as the bed slope, right? So that is why we use the energy slope at every point to try to understand, what the depth of flow at that point is, and so on, right? And the velocities. So the depth and velocity are related to each other, right? So we use the energy slope instead of the bed slope in the Manning's equation when we are solving for gradually varied flow. Okay, so that's the justification for using this assumption. All right. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so let us consider gradually varied flow happening in a channel. Let's assume that at a certain cross section I have a flow depth of y with a velocity of v. Okay, and then I move a certain distance along the channel. Let us say I move a distance of dx. Okay, so it's a small distance. I've moved a small distance, but because it is a gradually varied flow, the water depth has changed from y to y plus dy. Okay, so although it looks as if y plus dy is smaller than y, I'm using y plus dy only for notation. Dy could be negative also, right? So it is just changing. Okay, y is changing from something to y plus dy. Okay, that dy could be positive, could be negative, whatever it may be. Okay, so correspondingly, when y changes to y plus dy, the velocity also changes from v to v plus dv. Why does it change? Why does the velocity change if the depth is changing? Because the flow is steady, right? The flow rate is not changing. So if depth changes, which changes the area of cross section, the velocity also has to change correspondingly, right? So if you look at this slice of the channel where I have flow depth of y and y plus dy and velocities of v and v plus dv, what would happen if I were to represent this in terms of our Bernoulli equation, right? So let us assume that the bed slope is S naught between these two points. Let us assume the bed slope is S naught, right? So the vertical distance between these 2 points is simply S naught times dx, right? The distance between them, the horizontal distance between them is dx, and the bed slope is S naught. So therefore, the vertical distance between them will simply be this bed slope multiplied by dx, right? So that is my vertical distance, or the datum head difference between these 2 points is S naught times dx. And now I'm going to represent the velocity head. Let us say if v is the velocity at this cross section, the velocity head will be v square by 2g, right? So I have v square by 2g, the velocity head at this cross section. Then I move to this cross section 2, if you want to call it cross section section 2 at this flow. Then the velocity head here will be v square by 2g plus dv square by 2g, right? So I've gone from a velocity head of v square by 2g to a velocity head of v square by 2g plus dv square by 2g. All right. So now if I join these 2 points, right, this point over here and the point over here, what is this line representing? Does anybody want to answer that? What is
Energy
this line?
grade line.
EGL.
Yes, it's the energy grade line, right? Why is it the energy grade line? Because at this point, let us say this is cross section 1. I have S naught dx, which is the elevation head, plus y, which is the pressure head, plus v square by 2g, which is the velocity head. So that's the total energy. Total energy at point 1 is the summation of all of these three. At this point, I'm assuming that the datum is passing through this point, right? So therefore, datum head is 0. Pressure head is y plus dy, and velocity head is v square by 2g plus dv square by 2g, right? So this is the total. This point represents the summation of these two represents the total energy at point 2, and this point represents the total energy at point 1. So if I join these two, that gives me my EGL, or the energy grade line, right? So then, if you remember the equation that we used in the previous slide, we had used the slope SF, right? So that SF represents the friction slope. Okay, why is it the friction slope? Why do we call it the friction slope and not something else? I said energy slope in the last slide, I think, but it's more appropriate to call it the friction slope. Bernoulli equation, under ideal conditions, this friction slope should be horizontal, right? I mean, SF should be 0. EGL should be exactly over here. EGL energy at point 1 and point 2 must be exactly equal if Bernoulli equation is the ideal conditions for Bernoulli equation exist. The reason why there is a drop in the energy is because there is friction losses in moving from point 1 to point 2, right? So this slope is represented as SF, as the frictional losses that happen between point 1 and point 2, and that is what causes this energy grade line to actually have a slope, right? So I have SF. So then this distance, this vertical distance, is simply SF multiplied by dx, right? So that's fairly obvious. Now I'm going to write the Bernoulli equation between points 1 and 2. So I'll write the Bernoulli equation, which is very simply y plus v square by 2g plus s naught dx, so that is the total energy at point 1, equal to y plus dy plus v square by 2g plus dv square by 2g plus sf into dx, right? So this sf into dx, you can think of it like your frictional head losses between points 1 and 2, right? So that's, any questions on this? This is fairly straightforward, right? So I've simply written Bernoulli equation between point 1 and point 2 using all the geometry and all that. I'm using s naught dx, sf dx plus the regular terms in the Bernoulli equation, right? So here you can see there's clearly some terms will cancel out. Y and y will get cancelled out. V square by 2g and v square by 2g will get cancelled out. We will be left with, and then I divide both sides by dx. Then I get dy by dx plus d by dx of v square by 2g equal to s naught minus sf. Okay, is this okay? Any questions? All right, okay. So then I simply further simplify this equation and I get dy by dx equal to s naught minus sf divided by 1 minus Froude number square. Okay, so any questions on how we went from this equation over here to this? This Froude number square didn't exist in the previous equation. How did it suddenly appear? Any questions on that? Did anybody try to solve this? Anybody, please, quickly. Okay, let me quickly just annotate that so that we can. Okay, so it's basically d by dx of v square by 2g. No, I'll just write it as text. It's too difficult to draw it. Yes.
So v square by 2g can be into
Yes.
y.
What is that? V square by 2g will be what?
Can be written as Froude number square into y.
Froude number square into, oh yeah, okay, fair enough. Oh, that's a very elegant way of thinking about it.
Yes.
Yeah, let's do it the other way around also. Okay, we'll do this simple way of it. I mean, we'll do the more complicated way and then we'll come to yours. Okay, so d by dx of v square by 2g is simply d by dx of q square by 2g into a square, right? Q square by a square. Now q is not changing. It's not a function of x. A square is the only thing that's a function of x. So that will become, let me write that. So it will become minus q square by 2g. What is it? A cubed, I think. 2g or g a cubed, sorry. Q square, this should be q square, I'm sorry. Q square by g a cubed, because the 2 and that 2g, the 2 will get cancelled out, into dA by dx, right? So d by dx of q square by 2g a square simply becomes minus q square by g a cubed into dA by dx. dA by dx, I'll write it as dA by dy into dy by dx. Chain rule. You all know this, right? What is dA by dy? Capital T, right? If you remember from our earlier. So you see what we have got? We have got minus q square t by ga cubed into dy by dx, right? So this d by dx of v square by 2g has simply become minus q square. So what we are getting is equal to minus q square t by g a cubed into dy by dx, right? So if you put that into this equation, you will get dy by dx minus q square by 2t ga cubed into dy by dx. q square t by ga cubed is simply Froude number square. So that is how we got this Froude number square over here, and then I've just cross multiplied it. I'm getting dy by dx equal to s naught minus sf divided by 1 minus Froude number square. All right. Okay. So then, now when you look at this equation, there are a couple of interesting things that we should observe, right? What happens when y tends to y naught? What is y naught? What is y naught?
Normal depth.
Normal depth, right? What happens when y tends to y naught? I want somebody else to answer other than Ajay, maybe. Huh? Who wants to go? Okay. I see only the same people coming to the class again and again. So there's no new names. I've already called everybody. So maybe I'll call somebody again. Anjana. Okay, you have been unmuted. So what happens when y tends to y naught?
Vertical.
No, why not? Why not is normal depth?
Don't remember.
You don't remember. Okay. So what will happen? Okay, thank you. So what will happen when y tends to y naught? Anybody else? Bit 2. What will happen when y tends to y naught? When y tends to y naught, which means the flow is becoming uniform flow, right? Aditya, yes.
So dy by dx would be equal to 0.
dy by dx will tend to 0, right? Is that okay? How did we get that? When y tends to y naught, the flow becomes uniform flow, right? When flow becomes uniform flow, is there any difference between S naught and SF?
No.
S naught and SF will become one and the same, right? If you remember, in uniform flow, the bed surface, the water surface, and the energy line are all parallel to each other, which means the bed slope and the energy slope will be parallel to each other. So S naught and SF will be exactly equal, right? So therefore, when y tends to y naught, dy by dx will tend to 0, because SF will tend to S naught, which means dy by dx, the numerator will become 0. So therefore, dy by dx will tend to 0 when y tends to y naught. All right. So that is one simple thing that we can draw at just looking at this. Then when y tends to yc, yc is critical depth. When y tends to yc, what happens to Froude number?
1.
Froude number will tend to 1, right? So if Froude number tends to 1, Froude number square will also tend to 1. So this denominator will become 0. Then dy by dx will start tending to infinity. Right? So then what does that mean? The water surface slope is becoming larger and larger. That's what it means. So in a gradually varied flow profile, if the water depth starts to approach critical depth, it starts to approach it, with a very high slope. So therefore, that doesn't actually, strictly speaking, it will not get classified as a gradually varied flow profile, because for a gradually varied flow profile, if you remember, the very basic assumption was that the water surface slope should remain very small. Okay, it should not become large. So when y tends to yc, the gradually varied flow profile actually does not stops being a gradually varied flow profile. It becomes a profile where the water surface slope is changing very rapidly. Okay, so when you approach yc, dy by dx becomes very large. You typically don't want that situation to happen. Okay, so that is the other criteria. The first one, if you look at it, what it tells you is that this as y tends to y naught, dy by dx starts tending to 0, which means in a gradually varied flow profile, the water depth will approach the normal depth asymptotically, right? So you have to go a very long distance for it to approach to y naught. As you get closer and closer to y naught, the slope becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. The slope keeps reducing as you approach the y naught. So you will never actually reach it, because you will always keep getting closer and closer, but asymptotically it will reach to the normal depth. Okay, so that's it's a mathematical conception of it. Okay, all right. So any questions on this?
Sir, what is y naught, sir?
Y naught is normal depth. I suggest something to you. Why not you study, go back and look at the older lectures. Okay, because this terminology you have to, there's nothing else we can do.
Sir,
Right.
normal depth means?
Normal depth is that depth at which we have uniform flow. That's what I'm saying, Chakra, there. You have to be looking at all the lectures. I mean, either you make notes or you watch the videos again. Watching the videos again means you have to spend 1 hour again or 45 minutes again. But if you make notes, you just quickly go back to your notes, you will see all these terminologies. See, nobody can remember them. It's unless you keep in contact with it, you will not remember it, right? At least, if we were in class, you would see me writing on the board, but unfortunately we don't have that luxury right now, right? So we have to, somehow come up with a way for us to, remember these things, right? I'm not saying it's great to memorize these things, but in a short term, you need to memorize. For a short term, during a semester, you tend to memorize some small terms like this. Y naught means normal depth. Normal depth means that depth at which uniform flow happens, right? So those are the fundamentals that we have been, kind of building up in the last 2-3 classes as we are discussing open channel flow. Okay, so y naught is normal depth. Normal depth is that depth at which you have uniform flow. All right. Okay, any other questions? All right. Yes, somebody. Okay. Now we are going to talk a little bit about classification of slopes. Yes.
Sir, equations I can see many, but last 2 lectures or 1 lecture, I am unable to understand it physically.
Okay.
Like physics, what is happening means, like we are getting, like if we get a bump, sometimes it decreases the width, the depth of the stream decreases, sometimes it increases.
Yeah.
Depending on the curve we intersected, 2 cases we get like this. Means like I'm unable to get it, but physically why this is happening means, like from fundamentals of forces, blah blah blah, I'm unable to get.
Fundamentals of forces. Okay, so we discussed it from the point of view of specific energy, right?
Yes.
Right. So you agree energy is fundamental?
Yes, sir. Energy is fundamental. I agree. But
No. Listen me out. Don't be in a hurry. Okay, so let me try to answer that. Right. So energy is a fundamental. The specific energy is something that we have extracted out of from the total energy. Right. We have just removed the datum head and we've got specific energy. Now that specific energy I'm saying that if I fix my flow rate and I fix a certain cross section, I get two depths at which the specific energy is the same. Now, what do I do? That is the way I've defined specific energy. I'm able to get the same specific energy for two different depths for a given discharge. Remember, this is all for a given discharge. I'm not talking about different flow rates. For the same discharge, at a lower depth, I get the same specific energy as at a higher depth. Right? So when I have a large depth, my velocity reduces. So summation of y plus v square by 2g gives me some number. When I have a smaller depth, I get a higher velocity, and the summation of y plus v square by 2g somehow happens to match that y plus v square by 2g for a higher depth. Right? So what I'm doing, I'm saying, okay, let us classify these two kinds of depths. One I'll call subcritical, the other I'll call supercritical. Right? These two, for the same specific energy, I have two corresponding depths. Right? So these two depths, I'm calling one as subcritical, one as supercritical. Now, why one is called subcritical, one is supercritical is a minor point. It's just a terminology. I mean, you can call it XYZ and ABC, whatever you want to call it, right? But for whatever reason, we are calling it something, subcritical, supercritical. Okay. Now, I'm saying if the incoming flow is subcritical, then a certain thing will happen. And if the incoming flow is supercritical, a different thing will happen, right? So it is perfectly from the point of view of still maintaining the same flow rate, the same cross section. The only difference is there's a bump, or there's a, in the bottom of the channel, and that is what you're getting. So what I would suggest is, the next time there is some rainfall or something, you go and just get out on the street and watch. Okay, or even just near your house, if you watch it, you will notice these things happening. Okay, so we see it so commonly that we don't pause to think about what the physics behind it is. Okay, because we are so used to seeing it. Okay, but of course, you still can't demonstrate that. You'll have to do it in a lab where I have a controlled environment and I say, okay, I have a larger depth and I have a smaller depth, but both of these are equivalent because the specific energies are the same. And then I introduce a bump in the channel. You will actually notice that it will happen. Okay, we are all seeing it in real life. When there's a rainfall event or something like that, you will see water flowing on the street. And when there's a change in the from the road to the gutter, there'll be a change in the slope. Okay, you will notice this, but we are not able to look at it from the perspective of subcritical and supercritical because we have never thought of it that way. That's all.
Sir, this why not for why not with you told that there will be a uniform flow.
Yes.
Why for why not there will be a uniform flow?
No, that is how we defined it. That is how we defined it. I'm saying that if I have a channel, okay, so let us assume I have a channel. Okay, at one end, assume that the channel is completely empty. Okay, at one end, just think of a simple straight channel. Okay, inside the lab, just think of it in the lab where I can control everything. Okay, I'm start pouring water at one end of the channel at a certain rate. Let us say 10 liters per second. Okay, the water flows in that channel and goes out of the other end. At the other end, at what rate will the water flow out?
Same rate.
At the same rate. As long as I keep supplying at the same rate, 10 liters per second, exactly constant, at the other end, it will keep going out at the same rate, 10 liters per second, because no mass can build up whatever it is, right?
Yes.
Now, if the channel inside the lab, okay, if I have it perfectly constant, the cross-sectional area is not at all changing at any point, the slope is all nice and uniform, there's no change anywhere, do you expect the depth of flow at different points in the channel to be different?
No, they will be same.
Why? Because the incoming flow is the same, the cross-section area is not changing, the depth, the slope is not changing, so the flow will be uniform.
No mass should be accumulated, so flow will be uniform.
That's all. We are choosing to call it why not, right? And we are calling it normal depth. Okay, so when I say normal depth, that doesn't mean it is the normal depth of flow.
No, means like why this concept came in gradually very flow.
Good question. That is why okay, let me go back to the previous slide. Okay, why did it come in gradually varied flow? This is the, I think, one of the questions that somebody answered. Yeah. So here in this equation, for uniform flow, we used to have S naught power half. That was the condition at uniform flow, right? So in the case of gradually varied flow, I'm replacing that S naught per half with SF per half. Okay. Now, the point I'm trying to make here is that if I don't use SF per half, in reality, for gradually varied flow, we don't know what to do, right? We only have this equation that's available to us. Locally, although it's a gradually varied flow profile, if you look at a very small section, at any given section, the slope is so small that you can almost assume that within that short distance dx, or whatever, some small distance you think of dx within this within the channel, within that short distance, because the slope is very small, we can assume that it is the same as uniform flow. For uniform flow, we already have an equation. V equal to 1 by n r power 2 by 3 S naught per half. So we say, you know what, why don't we use that same equation, except we will use SF instead of S naught. Okay. This SF may not be known beforehand, but if I know the material of the, cross section, whether it is concrete or wood or PVC or whatever it is, then I will know what the N value is. If I know the, wait a second, if I know the flow rate, and if I know the depth at that cross section, I can infer what this SF will be using this equation. Okay, yes.
You told that when we open the tap, the water will get thinner, na?
Water will get thinner as you go down. Yes.
Because of gravitational acceleration, something.
Yes. Yes.
So if it is, means it is not uniform flow, as it is getting thinner, it is not uniform flow.
Yes.
So means when there is theoretically, if there is some slope, then it shouldn't be a uniform flow.
No. No, that's what. So this uniform. So, but go back to that lab experiment. Just now you only said that it will not change it will be uniform. That's what you said, right? Because the slope is uniform, the slope is constant inside the lab, the cross-sectional area of that channel is not changing.
But when you open tap, you said due to acceleration it is getting thinner, na, sir?
Yeah, but that is because it is falling only under the influence of gravity.
But here we are.
Wait. There is resistance, but that resistance is due to air, right? The water is falling in air when you open a tap. But in this case, it is flowing through a channel where it is in contact with a solid. So naturally, between a solid and water, there will be much more resistance, friction, than between air and water. You agree?
So if viscosity is lesser, let's consider, let's say.
No, wait. Do you agree that the friction between air and water will be much less than the friction between?
I agree.
Of course, assuming that the air is stationary. If the air is also blowing, then it makes it different. If the air is stationary, if the wind is not blowing, okay. So then what I'm saying is, in the case of a tap that you have opened, the gravitational forces are so much more than the frictional forces of resistance between air and water. In the case of a channel, when everything is uniform, what is happening is that the gravitational force and the frictional forces are exactly in balance. That is why it is uniform.
How can they be in balance? It's like these are special cases, right? Aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, see, uniform flow is an approximation. I'm not saying that everything that happens in the world is uniform flow, but it is useful to use that uniform flow approximation to address those situations. Because in reality, right, if there's rainfall.
If the slope is very large, then this approximation fails.
Which slope?
The slope, just now we assume the slope is
bed
very
slope,
low.
right?
Ah.
Yeah, the bed slope, even when the bed slope is large, right? What will happen is, okay, so when I keep increasing the slope, the water will become thinner and thinner sheet, right?
Yes, sir. Yes.
It will become a thinner and thinner sheet because you are making it such that the gravitational forces are so much more than the frictional forces, right? But
So
if
I
you,
mean to say that this uniform flow approximation then doesn't valid. It will not be valid, no?
it will not be valid. But
Okay.
see, in reality, do you ever see a channel a channel that is running for many kilometers having such a steep slope? It will usually
Not
have a very gradual slope. Okay, that is why the uniform flow approximation is so useful, right? So I mean, what I suggest is, if you go to any natural river, okay, apart from in the mountainous regions, when as soon as it gets away from the mountains, it enters the plains, it will not have a very steep slope, because nature does not like that kind of instabilities. Steep slope means too much erosion, too much, all those things happen. Over a period of time, nature stabilizes to have a nice gradual slope, right? And then it just
Yes,
moves
sir.
smoothly. As you get closer to the river, the slopes will become very gradual. The slopes will not be dramatic. Okay, so that uniform flow thing still applies. Okay, so let's keep going on with gradually varied flow. So that addresses your question about slope. So we'll keep going. Okay,
Got it, sir. Got it.
all right, thank you. So let's okay, so now we'll talk quickly about classification of slopes. Okay, so on the one hand, critical flow happens independent of slope, right? This everybody understands. Critical flow is when this condition q square t by ga cube equal to 1. So here the role of slope is not at all felt, right? Critical slope is that slope at which we have minimum, critical depth of flow is that depth at which we have minimum specific energy for a given flow rate, right? So that critical depth is independent of bed slope, right? But normal depth, if you remember this equation, v equal to 1 by n r per 2 by 3 s naught per half. So this depends on the bed slope s naught, right? So therefore, if we can come up with some classification using this critical depth and normal depth, it will be very useful. Okay, so as we go on further with gradually varied flow profiles, you will notice that this critical depth and normal depth are very useful concepts in classifying these gradually varied flow profiles, right? So the classification looks something like this. If the critical depth, if the normal depth is greater than the critical depth, so look at the third column. If y naught, which is the normal depth of flow, all of this is for a given flow rate. Okay, don't think of this as generalities. Everything depends on the flow rate. For a given flow rate, for a given channel, for a given slope, okay, if y naught, if the normal depth of flow is greater than the critical depth of flow, that kind of a slope is called a mild slope. Okay, and it is denoted by the symbol capital M. If the critical depth of flow and the normal depth of flow are exactly the same for a given flow rate, for a given cross section, right? If they're exactly the same, then that kind of a slope is called a critical slope, and it is denoted by symbol capital C. And similarly, if I have normal depth of flow less than critical depth of flow, right? These are the only three possibilities, right? When you compare these three depths, these two depths, normal depth and critical depth, either normal depth can be greater than critical depth, or it can be less than critical depth, or it can be exactly equal to critical depth, right? So these three possibilities correspond to mild slope, critical slope, and steep slope. Okay, and they are represented by M, C, and S. Okay, there are only two other slopes possible which don't have any connection to normal and critical. One is horizontal slope. If I have a perfectly horizontal slope, no slope at all, like S naught equal to 0, then that is called, that is given the symbol H. And as you can readily imagine, if S naught equal to 0, it cannot sustain any uniform flow, right? Uniform flow cannot happen if S naught equal to 0, because uniform flow requires gravitational forces to be, to balance out frictional forces and so on. But sometimes, in a channel, you may have a short stretch which has a horizontal slope, okay, or which has a very very small slope. Okay, but these slopes generally are not encountered very frequently. Okay, so the last two are horizontal and adverse slope. Horizontal is when S naught is equal to 0, and that is denoted by the symbol H. And adverse slope is when the slope is opposite to the direction of flow. If the flow is happening from left to right and the slope is sloping from right to left, that is an example of an adverse slope. This again is not something that you will see very often in an open channel. Maybe for a short distance you may have an adverse slope. but generally speaking, the slope is always in the direction of the flow. Whatever direction the flow is going, the slope will also go in that direction, right? It will slope from the point at which flow is from the upstream end to the downstream end. That is the general direction of flow. There we have classified these slopes into these three regions, three types: mild, critical, and steep. Okay, so any question on this? Any questions on this classification? It's fairly straightforward.
Sir.
Yes.
This flow condition. Why so? That flow conditions I didn't understand.
For this flow condition, so this is not the result. If the flow condition is like this, then the slope will be called mild. Okay. If for a given slope, for a given channel, for a given flow rate, if my normal depth is greater than my critical depth, then I'll call that kind of a slope, I'll call it a mild slope. Okay.
Sir, this is what somewhat confusing me. Means slope means we can always slope means we always talk about bed slope. No?
Yeah, bed. That is what I'm talking about. I mean the
then
bed slope.
What does it do with depth of the channel?
Not depth of the channel, depth of flow. See, as you can see here, this normal depth depends on the bed slope, right? This equation over here. So for a given flow rate, what is R? What is R? Okay. See, usually you ask questions, I answer. Now I'm asking question, you answer. What is R?
I don't know, sir. I'm student. I don't know.
So you see, I'll be honest with you, Chakradhar, right? I'm expecting that everybody is watching these videos and understanding what it is and then coming to the class. Now, if you don't study it and come, or if you don't watch it and come, and then you ask these questions, I have no problem answering them. But think of the other students also, right? Their time is getting wasted because I'm assuming they've all watched it and they know what R is. R is the hydraulic radius. R is A by P. So that depends on the flow depth, right? So it's unfair to the others. Okay, so please be considerate to them. I would suggest that you ask those questions to me privately. I have absolutely no problem answering your questions. My job is to answer your questions. Okay, I don't have a problem with that. But given the constraints, that we are working under, it's unfair to the others. Okay, that's all I'll say. Okay, I'm not at all discouraging you from asking your questions. I want you to ask your questions. I want you to ask your doubts, but there's also a responsibility on your side to, to study and come, or to at least watch the videos and try to attempt to understand what these terminologies mean. If you don't understand what R is, then what can I do? I mean, given the constraints, I can't spend more time on this. Okay. So why not?
Understood, sir, but I was not sure.
I understand that, but I'm saying you should put in effort from your side also, Chakradhar. That's all I'm saying.
Yes, sorry, sir.
No. It's not about sorry and all. I don't want the sorry. It's in fact, it should not. I'm not the person you should apologize to. You should apologize to your classmates because they are the ones who are having to sit through it, right? Anyway,
sorry, mates.
That's okay. Fine. Okay. So this mild slope is when. So in fact, you should read this table backwards from this last column towards there. If I have a certain flow rate and a certain channel in which my normal depth is greater than the critical depth, then that kind of channel, whatever slope that channel has, we will call it a mild slope. If my normal depth and critical depth are one and the same, I'll call that a critical slope. And if my normal depth is less than my critical depth, I'll call that a steep slope. Okay. So any questions other than Chakradhar? Anybody else has any questions on this? Hey, Chakradhar, don't mind that I'm pointing out. Okay. Anybody else has any questions on this? All right. Okay. So these are the classifications, very straightforward classification. Okay. So on that basis, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of each of these different slopes: mild slope, steep slope, critical, horizontal, and adverse. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide the region above the slope. So this is the slope. The region above the slope is where the water flow is going to happen. So in any case, the water flow will be at some depth, right? In a given situation, the water flow will be at a certain depth. What I'm doing is I'm dividing up that region above the slope into 3 regions. Okay, dividing it into 3 components. So for each of these slopes, you will see 2 lines parallel to the bed slope, right? So in the mild slope, I have this dashed line, which is called the CDL, which is the critical depth line or the critical depth level. And then I have this dash dot line, which is the NDL or the normal depth line or the normal depth level. Okay. Similarly, for steep slope, I have, so for steep slope, if you remember, normal depth is less than critical depth. So normal depth line is below critical depth line. For a critical slope, critical depth and normal depth are one and the same. So therefore, there's just one line. So in these 2 cases, you see 2 lines. In critical slope, I see only one line because CDL and NDL are one and the same. Right? Again, in the case of horizontal bed, normal depth line is not defined. Also in adverse slope, normal depth is not defined. So you can say it's infinity or so on. So you only have the critical depth line in both these cases, right? So now once I've decided all of these 3 lines, then I call the region above the topmost line as region 1. And the region between the 2 lines is region 2. And the region between the slope and the bottommost line is region 3. In each case, right? So in the mild slope, I have the normal depth line. Above that is region 1. Between normal depth and critical depth is region 2. Between critical depth and the bottom slope is region 3. Right? That is for mild slope. When I come to steep slope, critical depth line goes above normal depth line. Okay. So the region above the critical depth line is region 1. The region between critical depth and normal depth is region 2. And the region between normal depth and the bed slope is region 3. Any questions on this so far? Is this obvious, or is there any confusion on this? I'm just dividing up the region above the slope depending on what the slope may be. If it's mild slope, the topmost line is NDL and the bottom line is CDL, right? If it is steep slope, the topmost line is CDL and the bottom line is NDL. If it is critical slope, CDL and NDL are one and the same. If it is horizontal bed, there is only CDL, there is no NDL. And if it is adverse slope also, there is only CDL and no NDL, right? So then I'm dividing these regions. So 1, 2, 3 for mild and steep. For critical slope, region 2 is between CDL and NDL, right? But CDL and NDL are right on top of each other. So region 2 does not exist in the case of critical slope. Is that okay? Similarly, for horizontal, region 1 does not exist because normal depth line is infinity. And for adverse slope also, normal depth line is at some infinity, very high. So I only have regions 2 and 3 and 2 and 3 in both horizontal and adverse slopes. Is this absolutely clear? If you have any questions, please stop me. So the reason we are doing all of this is because I want to differentiate between the different types of gradually varied flow profiles. In these different slopes, in these different regions, the profiles will be called different things, right? So suppose I have a mild slope in which the flow is changing from yn to yc. Sorry, y naught is the normal depth. From y0 to yc, it will be a mild slope in which the curve or the gradually varied flow profile curve is falling in region 2. Okay. So that will be denoted with an M2. It will be called an M2 curve. Okay. It will be called an M2 curve. Similarly, if I have for a steep slope, if I have flow changing from from critical depth to some other higher depth, let us say there's a dam over here. I construct a dam over here, which raises the water level to this point. Okay. Let us say, let me just annotate that quickly. Let us say I have a dam over here, which is causing the water level to be, okay. So this is you've all seen, this is the diagram of a dam. Okay. So let us say the water surface, I'm sorry. Okay. So I have a dam over here and the water surface has been changed to this level. Okay. So the water surface starts changing and approaches the critical depth, right? So if the dam causes this kind of a gradually varied flow profile, this gradually varied flow profile will be called an S1 curve. S because the slope is steep in this, for this particular situation, and 1 because it lies in region 1. Okay. And similarly, you may have C1, C3, A2, A3, H2, H3, and so on. Okay, so I'll just quickly show you the different. Yes, go ahead.
Sir, so this NDL line is this a normal
Yes.
depth. So if this slope is, if we get it flat, then that is the line we get, or what?
No, I don't understand. So you're talking about the horizontal bed.
Yeah, when this, suppose let's take this of mild slope.
Hmm.
If we move the slope, suppose if our this what do you call channels, the channel is in our control, like we can change its angle, slope. So if we make it horizontal, then that is that NDL line, sir, for our given flux, for our given flow rate.
Okay, I'll talk about the horizontal bed as a limiting case of this mild slope. Okay.
No, as we change the slope.
Wait. I'm getting to it. I understand what your question is. Let us say this is a mild slope for a given flow rate, right? Suppose I make the slope a little bit less. What will happen to NDL? Will it increase, decrease, what? Anybody wants to answer that? Suppose for a given flow rate, I have NDL at this level. Okay. Then I change the slope. I make the slope a little bit milder. What will happen to NDL?
It will
comes down.
increase.
One at a time. Somebody said something. Quickly.
It will increase.
It will increase. Okay, so that is Aditya's answer. All right. Aditya or Ayub? Sounds like Aditya.
Aditya.
Aditya. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So anybody else has any answer? What will happen to NDL? Will it?
It will remain constant.
No. Chakradhar, if you go back to that equation, if you remember, V equal to 1 by N R per 2 by 3 S naught per half. If I change S naught and I don't change Q, sorry, if I write this in terms of Q, this will be Q equal to 1 by N A into R per 2 by 3 S naught per half. If Q is not changing, but if I change S naught and the bed material is not changing, N is not changing, what has to change? Understand the question? Suppose I have Q equal to 1 by N A, which is a function of Y, R, which is also a function of Y, R per 2 by 3, and S naught per half. Okay. I don't change Q. I don't change the bed material. But I reduce S naught. I make the slope a little bit flatter. This A into R per 2 by 3 has got to change, right? Only then you can get the same equation for the same flow rate.
Yes, sir.
For the same flow rate, unless my this A into R per 2 by 3 has to increase to compensate for the decrease in S naught. Only then this equation will be balanced, right? So
Yes.
if my slope decreases, this term will increase. This term positively depends on Y. It's directly correlated. It's A into R per 2 by 3 is directly proportional to Y. So if Y increases, A into R per 2 by 3 will increase. And if Y decreases, A into R per 2 by 3 will decrease. Okay. So if S naught decreases, Y has to increase. So the normal depth level will increase. Okay. So let's move on. Yeah. So this NDL will keep rising if I make the slope milder and milder and milder. Right? If S naught, let us say in this case it is 10 power minus 3. Then I make it 10 power minus 4. NDL will go a little bit higher. If I make it 10 power minus 5, NDL will go even higher. If I make it 10 power minus 6, NDL will go even higher. So if I keep doing that, the limiting case of that is I make S naught equal to 0. So NDL will be at infinity, will go very, very high. So that is what I mean here. So that's why region 1 is not there. Region 1 is above infinity. There's nothing above infinity. So there's only region 2. Similarly with adverse, if I keep reducing this, here I was reducing it from 10 power minus 4 to minus 5, minus 6 up to 0. Now I make it minus 10 power minus 5, minus 10 power minus 3. I keep doing that. That is what adverse slope is. Then again, the NDL just keeps going higher and higher. It's just not defined. So you can think of it as infinity. Is that okay? All right. So that is the classification of slopes. Now on this basis, okay, so all of this I've taken it from Professor Subramania's book. Okay, Flow in Open Channels. It's an excellent book. So once I have, yes.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Sir, if we are transitioning from region 1 to region 2, then what?
Yeah, so now if you go back to this curve, when you say transition from region 1 to region 2, you mean, so let me try to understand that. So you're saying, what if the curve goes like this? Is that what your question is?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now, no matter what the slope is, you can never go from 1 to 2 like this. Because if you remember, when y tends to y naught, what is y naught? NDL. When y tends to y naught, dy by dx tends to
0.
0. So can it ever cross it? Never. You know what it will do? It can only do this. Oops, sorry. I'm so sorry. Okay, it can only do this. It'll come and then it'll get closer and closer and closer. So it'll asymptotically tend towards NDL. Okay, assume that I'm drawing it nice asymptotically. Okay, so that is if it is on this side. Okay, even if it is coming from here, it can't cross it, because again, when it tends to y naught, it will keep tending asymptotically to the normal depth level. So that is for mild slope, very convenient. What about when it approaches critical depth level? What happens then? What happens when it approaches critical depth? When y tends to yc, dy by dx tends to infinity. So is that a gradually varied flow profile? No. So it'll do this. It'll start doing this. So then this portion is no longer a gradually varied flow profile, right? This portion that I've drawn over here is not a gradually varied flow profile. All right. So you will never have flow that is going from one region to another. It will always be in one region only. Okay. It's impossible. What you're saying is basically impossible. All right.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thanks. Let's keep going. I'll not be able to complete the whatever I'd planned. I knew this would happen, but anyway. Okay. Let me clear this drawing. Okay. So then I'm going to get these different regions. So mild slope has got region 1, 2, 3, where y will be greater than y naught, greater than yc. Y means the depth of flow. The actual depth of flow can be greater than y naught and greater than yc. Then we'll call it an M1 profile. Similarly, if y naught is greater than yc, then that will be called an M2 profile. And if y naught greater than yc greater than y, then that will be called an M3 profile. So that you just simply have to go back to the previous slide. You'll understand what that means. Right? So if y is greater than y naught greater than yc, that will be M1. If y naught greater than yc, that will be M2. If y naught greater than yc greater than y, that will be M3. It's fairly straightforward. Okay. So I just urge you to spend a few minutes looking at this, because I don't want to just spend time reading the whole table. Okay. I strongly urge you to just spend a few minutes, look at this table, understand what it means, go back to that previous slide. I think it will be clear what all these different types of profiles mean. Okay. So then again, I've also got a few examples from Professor Subramania's book, which lists these different types of profiles. Just like I showed just now, Aditya, you'll see as it tends towards NDL, it becomes asymptotic. And as it approaches CDL, it becomes, they see a dotted line there, because the slope is increasing. It is no longer a gradually varied flow profile. Okay. So you see M1, M2, M3 curves, S1, S2, S3 curves. So when they approach NDL, it starts to approach it asymptotically. When it approaches CDL, it starts to approach it at a high angle, and that's why you see a dotted line there, right? So similarly, you will see for C1, C1 and C3 curves, or H2 and H3 curves, and A2 and A3 curves. Okay, so my suggestion is that you all spend some time, just looking at these curves and trying to understand what the different scenarios are. Email me, WhatsApp me, whatever, if you have any questions. Okay. Okay, so we'll quickly solve the problem and then we'll stop for today. Okay. So a rectangular channel with a bottom width of 4 meters and a slope of 0.0008 has a discharge of 1.5 cubic meters per second. In a gradually varied flow in this channel, the depth at a certain location is 0.3 meters. Assuming n equal to so and so, determine the type of GVF profile. It's a very simple, straightforward problem, right? So you are told that it is a rectangular channel and you're given the bottom width, you're given the slope, and you're given the discharge, right? So all the information that is required to find out the normal depth of flow is already available to you, right? And it is told that at a certain location in the gradually varied flow profile, the depth is so and so. What type of GVF profile is it, is the question. Okay. So what do? You first determine your normal depth. How do you do that? Q equal to 1 by n A into R power 2 by 3 S naught power half. Everything in this equation is known except Y naught, right? Q is known 1.5 cubic meters per second. N is given 0.016. A and R you can find out because it's a rectangular channel and the bottom width is given. What is A? A is simply B into Y naught, right? R will be A by P, right? P you can estimate, it's the wetted perimeter, so it will be B plus 2 Y naught. So you can write this whole thing in terms of B and Y naught, and B is known, so only Y naught is unknown. S naught is also known. So you put in all the variables into this. The only unknown is Y naught. You solve for it, you will get Y naught equal to 0.426 meters. Okay, so now we have solved for the normal depth. The next thing you do is to determine the critical depth. Okay, so the critical depth is Q square T by GA cubed equal to 1. You know Q, you know A, and T. T is the top width. So it's a rectangular channel, so it's the same as the bottom width, no problem. A is simply B into YC cubed. So you can solve for YC, you get 0.243 meters, right? So now we have solved for both the normal depth and the critical depth. So as you can see, the normal depth is greater than the critical depth. So the slope should be, what kind of slope is this? If the normal depth is greater than the critical depth, the slope is
Mild slope.
Mild slope, right? So since Y naught is greater than YC, channel slope is mild. So we can use the symbol M. Then we need to find out whether this given flow is happening in region 1, region 2, or region 3, right? So what is the depth at the certain location? Depth at the certain location is 0.3 meters, which is between Y naught and YC. Above Y naught will be region 1, below YC will be region 2, and between Y naught and YC will be, below YC will be region 3. Above Y naught will be region 1 because it is mild slope. Below YC will be region 3 because it is mild slope. And between Y naught and YC will be region 2. So since the actual flow depth is 0.3, which falls between Y naught and YC, the GVF profile is M2. All right. So this is a very simple problem. The next problem that we will look at is computing the depth of flow. Computing the length of the GVF profile. So this is, we have just identified what kind of profile is it, right? We have just identified it as an M2 profile. But if I want to find out what the length of this M2 profile will be, we'll be using a numerical computation approach, which we will discuss in the next class. It's already there in the end of the lecture. If you watch that lecture, again, if you want to before next class, you can watch it and you can come. So next class, we'll discuss that and then we'll move on to the next topic, which will be rapidly varied flow. All right. All right. Thank you very much. I think I've just gone a little bit over time, couple of minutes. All right. Thank you very much. So we will meet on Monday as usual. Send me your questions, email, WhatsApp, whatever it may be. All right. Thank you.